The air in the King's ballroom at St. James's Palace was thick with the scent of beeswax and whispered scandal. Hundreds of jewels glittered under the chandeliers, but every eye was fixed on one man. Duke Alaric Beaumont stood before the throne, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand he held a single sheet of parchment, delicate and creased, and as his fiancée, the beautiful Mademoiselle Emilia de Valois, watched in growing horror, he raised the letter. It was her letter. She could see them from across the room, the dark, smudged blossoms on the paper, where her own tears had fallen. And then he began to speak, his voice ringing out like a death knell. "My lords, ladies, your majesty, I wish to share a piece of prose, a testament to a woman's true heart." London, in the spring of 1826, was a city of rigid lines and veiled passions. For Mademoiselle Emilia de Valois, it was a gilded cage, an émigré from a noble French family that had lost everything but its name in the Revolution. She was her family's last, best hope. That hope had a name: Duke Alaric Beaumont. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England, a confidant of King George IV, and a man whose heart was said to be as cold and hard as the marble floors of his Mayfair mansion. Their betrothal was a transaction, a matter of statecraft, negotiated between her desperate uncle and the Duke's calculating solicitors. He would gain a wife of impeccable lineage and ethereal beauty. She would gain security for her family and a life of unimaginable luxury. She had met him only 4 times. Each meeting was a stilted, formal affair in a drawing-room crowded with chaperones. The Duke was handsome in a severe, classical way, with eyes the colour of a winter storm and a mouth that rarely smiled. He spoke to her of property lines, political alliances, and the duties of a duchess. He never once asked about her dreams, her fears, or the home she'd left behind in the sun-drenched fields of Provence. Emilia understood her duty. She was prepared to be a perfect duchess, to manage his household with grace, to bear him an heir, and to encase her own heart in ice to match his. She was prepared until she met Captain Lawrence Davenport. He was everything the Duke was not. A second son of a minor baron, Lawrence had nothing to offer but his courage, his kindness, and a smile that could coax the sun from behind the London clouds. He was a captain in the 95th Rifles, his uniform a modest dark green amidst the peacock finery of the ton, his face tanned by a sun not seen through a carriage window. They met at a crowded society music hall, pushed together by the throng. His hand had brushed hers as he offered her a glass of lemonade, and a current had passed between them, so potent and shocking it left her breathless. Their meetings were stolen, dangerous moments of pure, unadulterated life. A hurried conversation behind a potted palm, a shared glance across a crowded ballroom, and, on a few precious occasions, clandestine rendezvous in the misty dawn of Hyde Park, chaperoned only by her loyal lady's maid, Rosalind. It was there, amidst the dew-kissed roses, that Emilia's heart, which she had so carefully prepared to freeze, thawed and then burst into flame. Lawrence spoke to her not of duty, but of poetry. He saw not a future duchess, but the lonely girl from France. He listened, truly listened, to her stories of home, her love for painting, and her fear of the cavernous, silent life that awaited her. "He owns your future, Emilia," Lawrence had murmured one morning, his hand gently holding hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "But he doesn't own your soul. Never let him own that." The weight of her impending marriage pressed down on her, a physical ache in her chest. The wedding was a month away. The Duke had recently informed her, with the same dispassion he might use to discuss the weather, that a suitable military commission had been arranged for a certain Captain Davenport, a dangerous posting in the farthest reaches of the British colonies in India. It was a death sentence, disguised as a promotion. Amelia knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the Duke suspected. He had not accused her, had not even hinted at it, but his cold, intelligent eyes saw everything. This was his way of sweeping a minor inconvenience from his path. Lawrence was to sail in a week. They had one last meeting, a heartbreaking farewell in the shadow of an old oak tree as the city slept. "Write to me," he implored, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Promise me you will write. Tell me you are well. Tell me you haven't forgotten what we are. Your letters will be the only light I have in that God's forsaken place." She had promised, her own tears blurring his beloved face. "I will never forget," she whispered. "Never." That night, back in the suffocating opulence of her uncle's house, Amelia wrote the letter. It was not a letter from a future duchess. It was a desperate, passionate cry from a woman whose heart was being torn in two. She poured every ounce of her love, her grief, and her fear onto the page. She wrote of the first time they met, of the warmth in his eyes, of the stolen moments that had become her entire world. She wrote of the cold emptiness of her future, a life of silent dinners and hollow grandeur, with a man who was more a monument than a husband. "My dearest Lawrence, tonight the moon is hidden, and so is my heart. It beats only for you, a frantic, trapped bird against the bars of this gilded cage. To know that you will soon be an ocean away is a pain sharper than any blade. They can give my hand to another, they can place a coronet upon my head, but they can never touch the part of me that is, and always will be, yours. I remember the scent of the rain in the park, the way your laughter seemed to challenge the grey London sky. These memories are my only jewels now, more precious than any diamond the Duke might bestow. He offers me a world of power and privilege. But you, my love, you offered me myself. In your eyes, I was not a pawn in a political game. I was simply Amelia. I pray for your safety. I pray for your swift return. And I pray that somehow, in another life, we might find our way back to that garden. Until then, know that every sunrise I see, I will be thinking of you. Every silent, lonely night in that cold marble palace, I will belong to you. Yours, now and forever, Amelia. She sealed the letter, her hands trembling. As she pressed the wax, a single hot tear fell upon the parchment, landing near her signature. It spread quickly, a small, dark stain of sorrow. Another followed, and then another, blurring the ink of her final words. She did not wipe them away. They were as much a part of the letter as the words themselves. The next morning, she gave it to a trusted footman, with a sovereign for his silence, and specific instructions to deliver it to Captain Davenport's barracks before his regiment departed. It was the most reckless, dangerous thing she had ever done. It was the only thing she could do. Not all eyes in London were blinded by Amelia de Valois' innocent beauty. Some watched with the sharp, predatory gaze of a hawk. Lady Beatrice Cresswell was one such observer, a daughter of an earl with a pedigree as long as Amelia's, but a fortune that was rapidly dwindling. Beatrice had once considered herself a prime candidate for the Beaumont title. The Duke's choice of a penniless French girl was not just a disappointment, it was a personal insult. Beatrice moved through the ballrooms and salons of Mayfair like a spider, spinning webs of whispers and catching secrets in the delicate threads. She had noticed the stolen glances between the future Duchess and the handsome, penniless captain. At first, she dismissed it as a fleeting infatuation, a last gasp of girlish fancy, before the grim reality of a dynastic marriage set in. But then she saw more. She saw the way Amelia's face would light up, a brilliant, unguarded incandescence whenever Captain Davenport entered a room. She saw the way the captain's gaze would follow Amelia, a look of such profound longing and despair. It was almost a physical touch. This was no mere flirtation. This was a fire, and Beatrice knew that fires, if properly stoked, could consume everything in their path. She began to watch, to listen, to invest. A few coins to a parlour-maid in Amelia's uncle's house yielded information about a lady's maid, Rosalind, who seemed unusually devoted. A larger sum to a stable boy confirmed that Rosalind and her mistress took suspiciously early morning walks in Hyde Park, far earlier than was fashionable. The announcement of Captain Davenport's promotion to a perilous post in India was the talk of the military circles. To most, it seemed like a stroke of luck for a man of his station. To Beatrice, it was the first move in a chess game played by a master. The Duke was removing a piece from the board. It was a cold, efficient, and utterly ruthless maneuver, and Beatrice felt a surge of admiration for the man she wished to call husband. He was no fool, but his methods, she thought, were perhaps too subtle. A problem removed was not the same as a lesson taught. An insult avenged, however, was a display of power no one would soon forget. Beatrice's opportunity came sooner than she could have hoped. The footman Amelia had entrusted with her precious letter was a young man named Thomas, whose father was a tenant farmer on the Cresswell estate. His loyalty could be bought, not with a single sovereign, but with the promise of a secure future for his family, a promise Lady Beatrice was more than happy to make. She intercepted Thomas in a narrow mews behind Amelia's uncle's house. "The mademoiselle gave you a letter, Thomas," she said, her voice smooth as silk, a velvet glove over a mailed fist. "A letter for a Captain Davenport." The boy's face went white. "My lady, I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Beatrice purred, letting a heavy purse of coins jingle in her hand. "A duke's fiancé, writing to another man, a soldier being sent to the ends of the earth. It is a delicate situation. Such a letter could be easily lost, or it could find its way to someone who would appreciate its poetic sentiments. Someone who deserves to know the true character of the woman he is about to make his duchess." Thomas's resolve crumbled. The promise of security for his family outweighed the single coin from the French girl. He handed over the letter. Beatrice retreated to her carriage, her heart thumping with triumphant glee. She broke the wax seal with a silver letter opener, her movements precise and predatory. She read the words Amelia had written, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her face. It was better than she could have imagined. It was not just a note of farewell. It was a declaration of eternal love, a testament of passion, a complete and utter repudiation of the man Amelia was sworn to marry. And the tear stains. Oh, the tear stains were a masterstroke of fate. They were physical proof of the heartbreak and devotion contained within. She knew instinctively that simply showing the letter to the Duke in private would be a waste. He would break the engagement quietly, discreetly. Emilia de Valois would be sent back to France in disgrace, but the scandal would be contained, smothered under the weight of the Duke's immense influence. No, that was not enough. The humiliation needed to be total. It needed to be public. It needed to be a spectacle that would be talked about for a generation. The Duke's pride was his most famous and most vulnerable attribute. He was a man who demanded absolute control, absolute loyalty. This letter was not just evidence of infidelity, it was a mockery of his power, a stain upon the name of Beaumont. If she could present it to him in the right way, at the right time, She knew his reaction would not be quiet dismissal. It would be an eruption, a cold, devastatingly precise conflagration. Beatrice folded the letter carefully. The upcoming royal reception at St. James's Palace, just 2 days before the scheduled wedding, would be the perfect stage. All of society, from the king himself down to the most minor courtier, would be in attendance. It was there she would deliver her poison-laced gift to the Duke. She would watch him raid it, watch the ice in his veins turn to black frost. And then she would stand back and witness the beautiful, fragile Mademoiselle de Valois be utterly and irrevocably destroyed. The air in Duke Alaric Beaumont's private study was still and heavy, smelling of old leather, lemon polish, and power. It was his sanctuary, a place of order and control where the chaotic world was kept at bay by thick mahogany doors and velvet curtains. It was here, 2 nights before the royal reception, that he received Lady Beatrice Cresswell. He found her presence irritating. She was one of a flock of titled women who fluttered around him with a desperate, cloying ambition he found distasteful. He had agreed to see her only because her note had hinted at a matter of the gravest importance to the honour of his house. Lady Beatrice entered, not with her usual flirtatious simpering, but with a mask of sombre concern, brilliantly feigned. "Your Grace," she began, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "It pains me to be the bearer of such tidings. I have wrestled with my conscience, but my loyalty to your great name, and my friendship for you, compels me to speak." Beaumont remained standing behind his enormous desk, his expression unreadable. "Get to the point, Lady Beatrice." With a show of great reluctance, she produced the letter from her reticule. It lay on the polished surface of his desk, like a dead thing. "This came into my possession," she said, her eyes wide with false pity. "I believe it is from your fiancé, and I fear it was not intended for you." Alaric looked down at the letter. He recognized Amelia's elegant, continental script immediately. He saw the broken seal. He saw the dark, watery smudges marring the parchment. He picked it up. The paper was still faintly scented with the jasmine perfume she wore. For a single, unguarded moment, a strange emotion flickered within him. Not warmth, precisely, but a sense of possession. This was his, part of the woman who would soon be his. Then he began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, the stillness in the room became absolute, the silence so profound it seemed to have a weight. Lady Beatrice watched his face, a connoisseur of cruelty savouring her masterpiece. She saw nothing at first. His features remained a mask of aristocratic indifference. But she knew how to look. She saw the minute tightening of the muscle in his jaw. She saw the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin the colour of old parchment. And she saw his knuckles, gripping the letter, turn bone white. "My dearest Lawrence, it beats only for you, a frantic, trapped bird against the bars of this gilded cage. They can give my hand to another, but they can never touch the part of me that is, and always will be, yours." Every word was a hammer blow against the fortress of his pride. He was not a man given to jealousy. He considered it a vulgar, common emotion. What he felt was a rage so pure and cold it was almost sublime. It was the fury of a monarch whose subject has committed high treason. Amelia de Valois was his possession. Her beauty, her lineage, her future, they were all assets he had acquired. She was to be the Duchess of Beaumont, a flawless ornament to his name and station. And here, in this pathetic, tear-soaked confession, she had revealed herself to be not a diamond, but a flawed piece of glass. She had not only given her heart to another man, a penniless, insignificant soldier he had already contemptuously swept aside, but she had pitied herself. She saw his life, his world, as a gilded cage, a cold marble palace. She had dared to see him as a jailer. He read the letter again, and then a third time. The passionate, desperate love poured onto the page was an alien language to him. Alaric Beaumont had been raised by a father who believed emotion was a weakness and a mother who saw affection as a transactional commodity. Love, to him, was a fiction spun by poets for sentimental fools. To see it here, laid bare and aimed at another man by the woman who was to bear his name, was the ultimate insult. It made him a fool. It made him a cuckold before he was even a husband. When he finally looked up, his eyes were chips of ice. "Who is Lawrence?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Beatrice's feigned sympathy was flawless. "Captain Lawrence Davenport, Your Grace, the man you so generously helped secure a position for in India." The irony was not lost on him. He had thought himself so clever, so surgical in his removal of the problem. He had not realized the disease had already infected the patient so thoroughly. "I see," he said. He placed the letter back on the desk, his movements unnervingly calm. "You have done me a service, Lady Beatrice. You may go." She had expected an explosion, a tirade. This cold, quiet fury was far more terrifying. She curtsied and backed out of the room, her heart singing a triumphant, wicked song. She had lit the fuse. Now all she had to do was wait for the explosion. Alone in his study, Alaric stared at the letter. His first instinct was to burn it, to break the engagement, and to send Emilia de Valois back to France on the next tide, her reputation in tatters. But that would be a private victory. The whispers would circulate, but he would not have control of the narrative. People might even pity her, the poor foreign girl overwhelmed by the formidable Duke. No, the insult was public. Her love for Davenport, while secret, was a public betrayal of the vows she was about to take. The humiliation he felt was a poison in his veins, and the only antidote was to transfer that poison to its source. He would not be a subject of pity or speculation. He would be an agent of justice. He would make an example of her so profound, so complete, that no one would ever again dare to trifle with the honor of the House of Beaumont. He picked up the letter again, folding it precisely and placing it in the inner pocket of his waistcoat. It felt cold against his chest. He would not destroy it. He would use it. The king's reception was the perfect venue. In front of the entire court, in front of the world that mattered, he would reveal her for what she was. He would read her own pathetic, heartfelt words aloud. He would use her love as a weapon against her, turning her passion into her shame. He would make her a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in drawing rooms for years to come. It was not a decision made in heat, but in the coldest, most calculating region of his soul. It was, he decided, the only fitting response. St. James's Palace was a veritable galaxy of earthly stars. The light from 1,000 candles glittered on rivers of diamonds, on polished military medals, on the shimmering silks and satins of the most powerful people in the British Empire. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet, the murmur of 100 conversations, and the rustle of expensive fabrics. It was the apotheosis of the London season, and at its centre was the king, George IV, corpulent and rouged, holding court. Emilia de Valois stood beside her fiancé, Duke Alaric Beaumont, feeling like a beautifully dressed doll. The Beaumont diamonds, a pre-wedding gift, felt like a cold, heavy weight around her neck. She had not heard from Lawrence, and could only assume he was at sea, sailing farther away from her with every passing moment. Her heart was a hollow ache in her chest, but she maintained the serene, graceful expression required of a future duchess. She smiled, she curtsied, she murmured pleasantries, all the while feeling utterly disconnected from the glittering scene around her. The Duke had been strangely silent all evening, his usual cold demeanour intensified to a frightening degree. When he took her arm, his grip was like iron. She attributed it to the public scrutiny, the final formalities before their union. She could not have been more wrong. Suddenly, without a word to her, Alaric released her arm and strode toward the royal dais. The room quieted as he moved, his progress parting the crowd like a ship's bow through water. Such a public move by a man as famously private as Beaumont was unprecedented. He bowed low before the king. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the grand ballroom. A hush fell. The string quartet faltered into silence. "I beg your indulgence, and that of this esteemed company, for a moment." The king, intrigued, gestured for him to continue. "The floor is yours, Duke. We are always entertained by your diversions." Alaric turned, not to the king, but to face the assembled court. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Emilia. He held her there, pinned by the intensity of his stare, a look so devoid of warmth it was like looking into a grave. A knot of pure terror began to form in her stomach. "It is my great misfortune," the Duke announced, "to have discovered a lie at the heart of my impending marriage. I had thought to offer my name to a woman of virtue and honor. Instead, I find I have been betrothed to a creature of remarkable feeling." The sarcasm in his voice was a physical blow. He reached into his waistcoat and produced the letter. Emilia's blood ran cold. She recognized it instantly. The fold of the page, the very essence of the parchment that had absorbed her tears and her soul. It was impossible. It was meant to be on a ship halfway to the Indian Ocean. How? How could he have it? Her mind reeled, a maelstrom of confusion and rising panic. She looked around for an ally, a friendly face. But all she saw were hundreds of pairs of eyes, alight with a hungry, vicious curiosity. "I have here," the Duke continued, his voice ringing with theatrical clarity, "a letter. It is penned by my fiancée, Mademoiselle de Valois. But it is not addressed to me. It is a work of such passion, such heartfelt prose, that I feel it would be a crime against literature to keep it to myself." A collective gasp went through the room. This was beyond scandal. This was a public execution. Emilia felt the world tilt on its axis. She wanted to run, to scream, to faint, but she was frozen in place, a statue in a horror show of her own making. Alaric unfolded the letter. He held it up for all to see. "You will note the charming stains upon the page," he said, a cruel semblance of a smile touching his lips. "The marks of her tears. How very moving." And then, in a voice that was steady, merciless, and devoid of all emotion, he began to read her soul aloud to the world. "My dearest Lawrence." The name hung in the air, an indictment and a sentence all in one. Emilia swayed, and only the steadying hand of her horrified uncle, who had rushed to her side, kept her from collapsing. "It beats only for you, a frantic, trapped bird against the bars of this gilded cage," whispers erupted like wildfire. "A gilded cage! She calls the Beaumont estate a cage!" a woman hissed behind her fan. The Duke paused, letting the words sink in, then continued, his voice relentlessly clear. "To know that you will soon be an ocean away is a pain sharper than any blade. They can give my hand to another. They can place a coronet upon my head, but they can never touch the part of me that is, and always will be, Yours. Emilia closed her eyes, hot tears of shame and despair tracing paths down her cold cheeks. These were her most private, most sacred feelings, born of love and grief, now being twisted into a vulgar spectacle. Each word he spoke was a new lash on her spirit. She could feel the stares of the entire court upon her, the pity from a few, the schadenfreude from most. She saw Lady Beatrice Cresswell in the crowd, her face a mask of rapt attention and triumphant malice. In that instant, she understood. He read on, omitting nothing. He read of her memories of the rain-soaked park, of her view of him as a jailer, of her endless devotion to a man who was not him. The tear stains on the letter seemed to mock her, proof of a deep emotion she had lavished on the wrong man. When he reached the final lines, his voice was laced with ice. I pray for your safety. I pray that somehow, in another life, we might find our way back to that garden. Yours now and forever, Emilia. He finished. The silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. It was absolute, profound, and suffocating. The Duke calmly, deliberately, tore the letter in two, then in four, and let the pieces of her heart flutter to the polished floor. He turned back to the king. Your Majesty, he said, bowing low. I believe the engagement between myself and this woman is now at an end. I will not have a liar and an adulteress as my Duchess. He turned on his heel and strode from the room without a backward glance. He did not look at the woman he had just destroyed. The crowd, released from its spell, erupted into a cacophony of hushed, excited chatter. Emilia de Valois, the beautiful French rose, was left standing in the ruins of her life, the target of 1,000 merciless eyes, her reputation not just ruined, but annihilated. The Beaumont diamonds on her neck now felt like a hangman's noose. The world did not end. It simply became small, cold, and grey. The carriage ride from St. James's Palace was a blur of shame. Her uncle, a man who had seen her as his family's salvation, now looked at her with a mixture of fury and disgust. He did not speak a single word to her. The silence was its own condemnation. Within a day, the verdict of society was delivered. Emilia de Valois was a pariah. Invitations were rescinded. Friends who had fawned over her a week before now crossed the street to avoid her. She was the subject of vicious gossip, cruel caricatures in the penny papers, and the righteous condemnation of every matron in London. She had committed the ultimate sin. She had embarrassed a powerful man. The Duke's retribution was as swift as it was complete. Her family was ruined. The financial support he had quietly provided to her uncle was withdrawn, and creditors who had been held at bay by the promise of a ducal connection descended like vultures. They were forced to sell their house, their belongings, everything. Her uncle's final words to her were as cold as the Duke's heart. You have destroyed us. You are no longer welcome here. The family has made arrangements. The arrangements were for her to be sent to the convent of the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, a remote, wind-swept institution on the coast of Northumberland. It was a place for disgraced women of good birth, a repository for secrets and scandals, where they could live out their days in quiet penitence, hidden from the world that had cast them out. The journey north was long and bleak, as the lush green of the south gave way to the stark, rugged beauty of the northern coast. Emilia felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The shame was still there, a burning coal in her gut, but the crushing pressure of society, of expectation, was gone. There was nothing left to lose. In the stark, wind-swept convent, with its stone walls and the constant sound of the sea, she found a strange, austere freedom. There were no more balls, no more jewels, No more pretense. There was only work, prayer, and the anonymity of a simple grey habit. She was no longer Mademoiselle de Valois, the disgraced fiancée. She was simply Sister Agnes, a ghost among other ghosts. Meanwhile, in London, Duke Alaric Beaumont was celebrated. He was seen as a man of honour, a man who had rightly and justly defended his name against a deceitful foreigner. He received nods of approval in his clubs, words of support from ministers of the crown. He had won. He had asserted his control, demonstrated his power, and excised the weakness from his life. Yet victory felt strangely hollow. His mansion, which had always been a bastion of order, now felt cavernously empty. He would sit in his study at night, the silence pressing in on him. He had reassembled the torn pieces of the letter, fitting them together like a puzzle. He kept them locked in a drawer in his desk. Sometimes, late at night, with a glass of brandy in his hand, he would take them out and read them again. Without the audience of the court, without the burning rage of public humiliation, the words on the page began to shift in their meaning. He started to see past the insult to his pride and noticed the raw, desperate emotion beneath. A frantic, trapped bird against the bars of this gilded cage. The phrase echoed in his mind. Had she truly seen him that way? Had his world of power and privilege, a world he commanded, felt like a prison to her? He had never considered her feelings, her perspective. He had seen her as an acquisition, a beautiful object to be owned. The letter was proof that she was a person, with a heart and a soul that he had not only failed to win, but had never even tried to understand. He found himself thinking of the tear stains. In the ballroom, he had mocked them as a sign of weakness. Now, in the solitude of his study, they seemed like a testament to a depth of feeling he had never known, a feeling for a man who was now braving death in a foreign land, a man she had loved enough to risk everything for. The Duke did not feel regret. That was too simple, too sentimental an emotion for him. What he felt was a profound and unsettling disquiet. He had acted with perfect, logical cruelty, and yet he felt as though he had diminished himself in the process. This unsettling feeling was nurtured by an unlikely source. Mr. Abernathy, his quiet, efficient, and perpetually overlooked private secretary. Abernathy had been with the Duke for a decade, a man of impeccable discretion and quiet observation. He had been present in the ballroom that night, standing unobtrusively near the back. He had seen the entire, horrifying spectacle. He had seen the Duke's cold fury, but he had also seen the absolute devastation on Mademoiselle de Valois' face. Abernathy was a man of humble origins, who understood the nuances of power. He had always admired the Duke's strength and intelligence, but that night he had seen something else, a capacity for cruelty that went beyond mere pride. It had troubled him. A few weeks after the scandal, while organizing the Duke's papers, Abernathy made a discovery. He found a receipt from a jeweler, not for the famous Beaumont diamonds, but for a simple, modest silver locket. It was dated the week before the public humiliation. The delivery address was Emilia's. It was a purchase the Duke had made himself, a personal, unannounced gift. It was a gesture so out of character that Abernathy was stunned. He cross-referenced the date. The Duke had purchased this gift before Lady Beatrice Cresswell had come to him with the letter. For the first time, Abernathy saw a crack in his employer's marble facade. The Duke, in his own cold, clumsy way, might have been trying to make a connection with his future bride. The locket was not a grand ducal gesture. It was a personal one. The fury he had displayed was not just the anger of a proud aristocrat, but perhaps, in some small, unacknowledged corner of his soul, the pain of a man who felt a different kind of betrayal. Abernathy filed the receipt away and said nothing. But he began to watch his master more closely. He saw the late nights in the study, the untouched dinners, the way the Duke's eyes would sometimes drift, unfocused, as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. Mr. Abernathy, the unseen hand, knew that the story was not over. The pieces of the torn letter had been thrown to the floor, but their fragments were now lodged deep in the Duke's conscience. 18 months is a lifetime in the heat and chaos of colonial warfare. Captain Lawrence Davenport returned to England, not as the boyish, optimistic soldier who had left, but as a man hardened by battle and loss. He had distinguished himself with remarkable bravery, earning a field promotion to major and a chest full of medals. He had also earned a crippling wound in his leg from a sepoy's musket ball, leaving him with a permanent limp and a future unfit for active service. His hair was streaked with grey at the temples, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man who had seen too much death. Throughout his time in India, he had been sustained by one thing: the memory of Amelia. He had waited desperately for her letter, the one she had promised to send. But it never arrived. He had written to her a dozen times, pouring his heart out onto flimsy sheets of paper, sending them off with merchants and military transports, praying they would reach her. He never received a reply. He told himself the letters were lost, that the distances were too great. The alternative, that she had forgotten him, that she had settled into her life as a duchess, was too painful to contemplate. He learned the truth on his first night back in London, in a smoky, wood-panelled officers' club in Pall Mall. An old acquaintance, clapping him on the back and buying him a welcome-home brandy, began to recount the gossip of the past 2 seasons. "And you'll never believe the scandal of the age," the man chortled. "Duke Beaumont's French filly. Turned out she had a secret lover, some poor captain they shipped off to India. Can you imagine the gall? The Duke found out, of course. Read her love letter aloud to the entire court at St. James's. The king was there and everything. Tore her reputation to shreds. Haven't heard a peep about her since. Some say she was sent back to France. Others say she took the veil. Good riddance, I say. Can't have foreigners making a mockery of our nobility." Lawrence felt the blood drain from his face. The glass of brandy slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the floor. The name. Her name. His name, spoken aloud in that glittering, cruel room. The letter. His letter. The one he had begged her to write. The one that had never reached him. The officer's voice faded into a dull roar in his ears. All he could see was Amelia's face, her beautiful, expressive eyes, filled with terror and shame. The image was so vivid, so horrifying, it eclipsed all the horrors of the battlefield. The men he had killed, the friends he had lost, nothing compared to the agony of this. This was a different kind of warfare, a civilized, soul-crushing brutality he could barely comprehend. A cold, righteous fury, the likes of which he had never felt, settled over him. It was a rage that gave him strength, that made him forget the throbbing pain in his leg. He knew, with absolute certainty, who was responsible. Not just the Duke, but the entire rotten, heartless system that allowed a woman to be so utterly destroyed for the crime of love. The next day, without an appointment, Major Lawrence Davenport presented himself at Beaumont House. The butler, aghast at his audacity and his less than fashionable attire, tried to turn him away. "The Duke is not receiving," the butler sniffed. "He will receive me," Lawrence said, his voice quiet but imbued with an authority that had commanded men on the battlefield. He pushed past the sputtering servant and strode, limping heavily, towards the Duke's study, the location of which he had learned from his club acquaintance. He found Alaric seated behind his desk, surrounded by maps and ledgers. The Duke looked up, his expression of mild annoyance shifting to one of guarded recognition. He had not expected to see this man ever again. He certainly hadn't expected to see him in his home. "Davenport," the Duke said, his voice flat. "They told me you were dead." "The reports were, as in many things concerning me, inaccurate," Lawrence retorted, his hand resting on the silver head of his cane. "I've come to discuss my correspondence. It seems a letter intended for me was misdelivered." Alaric rose slowly from his chair. The two men faced each other across the vast expanse of the study. They were a study in contrasts. The Duke, tall, immaculate, the epitome of cold, aristocratic power, and the Major, battle-worn, limping, but with a fire of righteous fury in his eyes that the Duke could not match. "You have a great deal of nerve coming here," Alaric stated. "And you have a great deal of cruelty in your soul, Your Grace," Lawrence shot back. "Was your pride so fragile? Was your heart so empty that your only recourse was to destroy a woman in front of the world? To read her most private thoughts as a form of public entertainment?" "She dishonored me," the Duke said, his jaw tight. "She dishonored the vows she was to take." "She loved me," Lawrence's voice boomed in the silent room, raw and full of pain. "A crime for which you have no frame of reference. You don't know the meaning of the word. You see people as assets, titles as trophies. You saw her as a beautiful statue to place in your cold, empty gallery, and you were enraged to discover she had a pulse. You weren't defending your honor. You were punishing her for being human." Lawrence took a limping step closer, his eyes blazing. "You read her words aloud, but you never understood them. You never saw the girl who was trapped, who was frightened, who was sacrificing her own happiness for her family. You saw only a threat to your monumental vanity. You didn't just break her heart, Duke. You tore out her soul for sport. You showed the world you have nothing but a hollow space where a heart should be." Alaric Beaumont, a man who had never backed down from any challenge, who had faced down ministers and princes, found himself speechless. Lawrence's words were not the hot-headed accusations of a jealous lover. They were cold, hard truths, and they struck him with the force of a physical blow. They echoed the very disquiet that had been haunting his own solitary nights. For the first time in his life, the Duke felt the unfamiliar sting of shame. He saw his actions not through the lens of his own wounded pride, but through the eyes of the man Emilia truly loved. He saw the sheer, monstrous scale of his cruelty. As Lawrence turned to leave, his limp more pronounced in his anger, the Duke found his voice. "Where is she?" Lawrence paused at the door, his back to the Duke. "You don't deserve to know," he said, his voice heavy with contempt. "You lost that right when you turned her tears into a spectacle." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, the sound echoing the finality of a tomb. The Duke stood alone in his study for a long time. The soldier's words had shattered his defenses. The regret he had been holding at bay finally washed over him, a cold and bitter tide. He had been so sure of his own righteousness. Now, all he felt was the profound, empty weight of his mistake. Later that evening, he summoned Mr. Abernathy. "I want you to find out what happened to Mademoiselle de Valois after she left London," he commanded. "Everything. And Abernathy, find out who brought me that letter." The seed of doubt, planted by his own conscience and watered by Lawrence's fury, was finally beginning to grow. He needed to know the whole truth, no matter how much it condemned him. Mr. Abernathy's work was, as always, swift and discreet. Within a week, the Duke knew everything. He learned of Lady Beatrice Cresswell's calculated malice, of the bribed footman, and of how his own pride had been masterfully played like a violin. This treachery, however, paled in comparison to Abernathy's second report. Emilia was living as a penitent named Sister Agnes at a remote convent in Northumberland. The gilded cage she had written of was a paradise compared to the stone prison his cruelty had built for her. The ghost of Major Davenport's words, "You are punishing her for being human," returned to him with the force of a final judgment. For the first time in his life, Duke Alaric Beaumont felt the sharp, unfamiliar pangs of guilt. Atonement, a concept he'd once scorned, now seemed the only logical path forward. His first act was retribution, delivered with his signature cold precision. He did not confront Lady Beatrice. He simply dismantled her world. Through quiet words in powerful ears and the strategic calling in of debts, he saw the Cresswell family ruined and socially exiled. It was a brutal, fitting end to her ambition, yet it brought him no satisfaction, only the grim sense of a debt being paid. His second task required more than just power. It required a courage he was not certain he possessed. He travelled north, his carriage a dark intrusion on the wild, windswept coastline, and presented himself at the convent of the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. He was led to a sparse parlour. When Emilia entered, clad in a simple grey habit, he saw that the vibrant girl he had known was gone, replaced by a pale, serene woman. Her eyes, however, held no fear of him, only a sorrowful wisdom. "Your Grace," she said, her voice even. She did not curtsy. In this place, his title was meaningless. "Why are you here?" "I came because I was wrong," Alaric said, the words stark and stripped of their usual artifice. "What I did to you was monstrous. There is no excuse for it." Emilia looked at him, her expression a calm mask over a sea of memory. "Your pride cost me my name and my freedom," she replied, her voice devoid of accusation. "But it could not take my soul. I have found a different kind of peace here." "A peace you shouldn't have been forced to find," he countered. "I wish to give you your life back." He placed a heavy leather portfolio on the small table between them. "Lady Beatrice has been exposed. I have made it known that you were the victim of a malicious plot, and I was its arrogant instrument. Furthermore, inside this portfolio are documents settling a fortune in your name. A dowry, substantial enough to ensure your complete independence. You will be free to live as you wish, to marry whomever you choose." She stared at the portfolio, then back at his face, her composure finally cracking. "Why?" she whispered. "Because Major Davenport has returned," Alaric said, the admission a quiet surrender. "He survived India. He came to see me. He is a good man, mademoiselle, a hero. He still loves you." The dam of her composure broke. Tears, not of sorrow, but of a sudden, brilliant, and impossible hope, streamed down her face. The name she had forced herself to bury, the love she had relegated to another life, was suddenly real and within her grasp. "He is well?" "He is," the Duke affirmed. "And he is waiting for you in London. The choice is yours to make." In her tears, he saw the absolution he didn't deserve, but desperately needed. He had given her back the one thing he could never possess, a life filled with love. 2 months later, Emilia de Valois married Major Lawrence Davenport in a small parish church. It was a simple, joyous affair. Her Beaumont-funded dowry afforded them a life of quiet freedom on a country estate with a sprawling rose garden. Their days were filled not with grandeur, but with the profound, everyday happiness she had once only dreamed of. Duke Alaric Beaumont never married. He remained a powerful and respected figure, but a subtle change had settled deep within him. He was a man marked by his own cruelty, forever humbled by the memory of a woman's tears. In the locked drawer of his desk, he kept the pieced-together fragments of her letter. It served as his private penance, a constant reminder of the day he tried to break a woman's heart and instead shattered his own cold, empty world. And so, the Duke was left in his silent marble palace, a powerful man who learned too late that a person's heart is not a territory to be conquered. Emilia and Lawrence's story reminds us that true wealth isn't found in titles or fortunes, but in the courage to love against all odds. It's a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that true power lies not in humiliating others, but in the quiet grace of redemption. What did you think of the Duke's final act? Was it true atonement or simply another power play? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Emilia's journey from disgrace to happiness, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a dramatic romance, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of love, betrayal, and history's forgotten voices. Your support means the world. Thank you for listening.